Before dawn, Tatsuya and his daughter Haru had already arrived at the shop to start making tofu for the day. Soaking the beans and grinding the soy milk, they then entered the core process of tofu making: coagulation. For decades, this step has always been personally overseen by Tatsuya. When the seemingly ordinary coagulant meets the soy milk, it triggers a wonderful chemical reaction. With gentle stirring, the coagulated protein precipitates out. Tatsuya scoops the tofu curds into molds, and finally his daughter Haru cuts the tofu into suitable shapes for sale. Once everything is ready, the morning light begins to show outside, and the aroma of soy fills the shop. This is a snapshot of every morning for Tatsuya and his daughter, ordinary yet filled with genuine warmth. At over 70, Tatsuya's physical strength is no longer what it used to be. After completing the tofu production and supermarket delivery, the shop is entirely managed by his daughter Haru. The shop also sells other soy products, and regular customers particularly love the cheese-stuffed fried tofu balls made by Haru. Those with cheese filling make the taste richer. However, why have they stopped selling them recently? When asked, Haru feels helpless. Her father is quite traditional, not fond of new things, and firmly believes that the essence of tofu should not be casually changed. A regular customer couldn't help but remind Haru. They heard that a new supermarket is opening nearby, and if they don't launch new products to attract customers, business might be diverted. Upon hearing this, Haru simply smiled calmly. This street-side tofu shop has a simple facade, unremarkable decor, and no proper advertising, but thanks to her father's coagulation skills, it has been beloved by the neighborhood for decades. As she savors the warm aroma of soy in the air, Haru feels a sense of certainty. She believes this shop will always be here. Meanwhile, Tatsuya is chatting with neighbors at the barber shop. Since her divorce years ago, his daughter Haru has had no thoughts of remarrying. Tatsuya doesn't mind this. Not getting married is fine. His wife passed away early, and with only this daughter by his side, who can also help run the shop, he truly cannot bear to see her leave. However, several neighbors who watched Haru grow up feel that her remaining single like this is not a long-term solution. They know some decent men and are very willing to introduce them. After all, Tatsuya is getting older, and to put it bluntly, if something were to happen to him one day, leaving Haru all alone, what would she do? The neighbor's words stir a wave of hidden worries in Tatsuya's heart. When he returned home, he intended to bring up the topic of matchmaking at the dinner table, but he hesitated several times out of reluctance. That night, Tatsuya suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. The next day, a hospital examination diagnosed him with angina caused by a coronary artery blockage. More dangerously, he has an aneurysm in his body like a ticking time bomb, with the risk of rupture at any moment. As he left the hospital, Tatsuya accidentally dropped his gloves, and a woman waiting for her appointment picked them up for him. Tatsuya was feeling restless and just hurriedly thanked them before leaving. Tatsuya was unwilling to imagine the scene of leaving his daughter alone in the world, and finally relented on the matter of matchmaking, asking the neighbors to keep an eye out for suitable candidates. However, after a series of introductions, Tatsuya felt that no one was worthy of his daughter. Either they were too old or not good-looking enough. After filtering through many, he only found himself more troubled. He turned away in frustration. The restaurant owner nearby saw through his thoughts. On the surface, he was asking for introductions, but in reality, Tatsuya would not be satisfied with anyone. He simply could not bear to part with his daughter. To promote Haru's happiness, the neighbors expanded their search to the entire county, carefully selecting a group of higher-quality gentlemen. The next day, when Tatsuya went to deliver goods to the supermarket, he learned that the supervisor of the food shelf had changed to Michio from the women's clothing department. Michio had specifically drafted a new cooperation plan for Tatsuya's tofu and hoped to discuss it in detail. Tatsuya immediately understood Michio's intentions. Michio aimed to introduce Tatsuya's tofu to the Tokyo market. Tatsuya's attitude was resolute, stating that there was no room for negotiation on this matter. No matter what proposal was put forth, Tatsuya's tofu would only be sold in the Onomichi area and would never be exported. In Tatsuya's view, leaving his rooted homeland to sell tofu in a completely unfamiliar city left him with no confidence. Moreover, the daily tofu was made by him and his daughter in small batches, so production was limited. Once production was expanded, whether they could keep up with the demand was secondary. What worried him most was the loss of quality control. Tatsuya feared ruining his family's reputation, so he repeatedly rejected proposals to broaden their sales channels. In the supermarket restroom, Tatsuya unexpectedly discovered that the cleaner was the same woman who had helped him pick up his gloves at the hospital. He paused to chat with her for a few moments and learned that her name was Fumi, who had a pacemaker installed due to heart valve issues and needed regular checkups. As fellow patients, Fumi wanted to exchange contact information with Tatsuo, but he handed her a paper business card. This surprised Fumi. In an era where everyone was busy fiddling with their phones, he didn't even own a mobile phone. After bidding farewell to Fumi, Tatsuo met up with his neighbors. He decided to personally oversee the process for his daughter and organized an interview to meet these candidates. Some of them initially had decent conversations, but as soon as they mentioned plans to move to Tokyo, Tatsuo immediately dismissed them. What's so good about Tokyo? Why do people always want to flock to big cities? Onamichi is clearly great. It wasn't until another gentleman named Tsutomu appeared that Tatsuo's tense expression slightly relaxed. This person speaks appropriately, has a gentle temperament, operates 5 Italian restaurants in the county, and is financially capable of ensuring his daughter's carefree life. What's more, he also enjoys cooking, providing common topics with Haru. Tsutomu mentioned that he had met Haru at a food exhibition, and the two had a delightful conversation about tofu. Tatsuo immediately decided he is the one. Although the candidate was chosen, another problem emerged. Tatsuo had never disclosed any matchmaking arrangements to his daughter. If he were to tell her directly, Haru would definitely refuse to meet Tsutomu. Thus, they discussed creating an accidental encounter. Since Haru and Tsutomu had met once, why not have Tsutomu coincidentally pass by the tofu shop and take the initiative to greet Haru? Tatsuo would then pretend not to know him and suggest having dinner together, creating a natural opportunity for the two to interact. In the following days, with the help of the neighbors, Tatsuo practiced repeatedly, striving to make the small talk during the accidental meeting with Tsutomu seem natural, so as not to reveal any flaws in front of his daughter. On the day of the plan's implementation, Tsutomu arrived as promised. Unaware of the situation, Haru felt happy to reunite, but was also puzzled. Why was her usually serious and taciturn father so warm and eager to invite a stranger he had just met to dinner? After agreeing on a restaurant, Tatsuo received an afternoon tea invitation from Fumi. She hoped Tatsuo could come to the Community Activities Center on the weekend to watch her piano performance. Tatsuo gladly agreed. Having lost his wife and with no close relatives besides his daughter, he inevitably felt lonely. Fumi's kindness brought him comfort, and he specially brought a gift from the shop, a box of cotton tofu and a bottle of freshly ground soy milk. Though the gift was not expensive, it was given with sincerity. After returning home, Fumi, following Tatsuo's advice, added no seasonings and gently picked up a small piece of tofu with bamboo chopsticks to taste. In an instant, the rich and fragrant flavor of the soybeans spread on her tongue, and the smooth and delicate texture left a lasting aftertaste. On the day of dinner with Tsutomu, after 2 glasses of red wine, Tatsuo felt the familiar heaviness in his chest again. To avoid worrying his daughter, he excused himself, went to the restroom, and took medication to alleviate it. Thus, only Haru and Tsutomu remained at the table, and the conversation naturally returned to tofu. Haru told Tsutomu that she was involved in every step from selecting beans to packaging, except for the brine process, which her father insisted on completing himself and had never taught her. But she deeply understood. The brine is the key to determining the quality of the tofu. Just as people have personalities, tofu also has character. Some are resilient, some are weak, and some are ostentatious. It may sound abstract, but as long as the maker invests effort, diners can taste the quality of the tofu when they eat it. Although Haru had no special feelings for Tsutomu, talking about tofu opened up the conversation. She mentioned the tofu she had bought from another store, where there was a long line outside, but was greatly disappointed after tasting it. The bean flavor was weak, and upon checking the ingredients, there were many additives besides the coagulant. Such tofu cannot be considered a heartfelt creation at all. Haru viewed tofu making as a lifelong passion and commitment, and seeing such a perfunctory product, she poured out all her accumulated disappointment. On the way home after dinner, Tatsuo hesitated several times to speak. He wanted to confess the true purpose of the meal, to let his daughter pursue her own happiness, but he was deeply entangled in reluctance. After much inner turmoil, he ultimately could not bring himself to speak. The next day, Tatsuo returned from a walk to find the new supermarket manager, Michio, unexpectedly at his store's entrance, talking with Haru. It turned out that Michio planned to launch tofu dishes based on Haru's skills at the summer outdoor beer garden, and Haru had been studying baking materials for this preparation. For Tatsuo, tradition meant correctness. cheese tofu balls and new-style tofu dishes were simply unorthodox. However, faced with his daughter's earnest gaze, he still made a concession. As long as it did not affect the daily tofu supply for regular customers, it would be fine. After dinner with Tsutomu, Tatsuo did not inquire further about their relationship's progress. At least on that day, they seemed to get along well, and surely they still had contact privately. Neighbors often joked. Perhaps soon Haru would shyly announce her marriage news to him. Time flowed leisurely, and before long, it was spring again the following year. One evening after dinner, Haru's cheeks were slightly flushed, and after hesitating for a moment, she finally spoke up about wanting to take her father to meet someone. The identity of that person was self-evident. It must be the one Haru intended to entrust her life to. Although he had rehearsed the scene countless times in his mind, Tatsuo still felt a wave of anxiety at that moment. Before his daughter could finish, he excused himself to handle tax matters and hurriedly left. Upon learning of this, the neighbors advised Tatsuo not to be so stubborn. Children have their own life trajectories and sources of happiness. If one always binds their children to themselves, it may seem protective, but is actually selfish. What plans would he have for Haru after he was gone? Encouraged by everyone, Tatsuo gathered his thoughts and returned to the store, determined to face the fact that his daughter was about to start her own family. Haru tried to prepare her father for her beloved, repeatedly emphasizing, although the other person seemed ordinary in appearance, he was diligent in his work and sincere. Feelings had gradually developed between them as she delivered goods daily. Upon hearing this, Tatsuo felt something was amiss. Tsutomu was impressive and successful. How could he seem ordinary? When did his daughter become the tofu supplier for his restaurant? Haru then understood that her father had misunderstood and quickly clarified. The person she wanted to marry was Michio, the supervisor of the supermarket's food department. Tatsuo felt as if struck by lightning. Why did his daughter choose someone like Michio, who was short and average-looking? He suddenly felt a tightness in his chest and could no longer listen to Haru's subsequent words. Tatsuo rushed out of the tofu shop, called a few neighbors, and went straight to Tsutomu's restaurant to get to the bottom of it. Tsutomu also felt quite helpless and admitted that he had indeed pursued Haru seriously, but she had never been interested. After being gently rejected during a candid confession, the two had lost contact. The handsome and wealthy son-in-law he had anticipated suddenly turned into an ordinary supermarket supervisor, and the disparity left Tatsuo feeling blocked in his heart. However, what surprised him even more was that before he could criticize Haru's choice of partner, his daughter had already begun to treat him coldly. Since Tatsuo refused to meet Mikio, Haru began a silent resistance. No matter what her father said, she pretended not to hear. This stalemate lasted only 2 days before Tatsuo compromised first. He simply couldn't stand the gloomy atmosphere at home any longer. Moreover, his health was deteriorating, and he had little time left to spend with his daughter. Besides, after being single for many years following her divorce, now that his daughter had finally met someone she liked, why should he obstruct her? However, it would still take time for Tatsuo to truly accept Michio as his son-in-law. Therefore, on the day they met, he found it difficult to relax his brow. Considering his daughter's feelings, Tatsuo tried hard to endure. Even when he learned that Michio was a fan of the baseball team he disliked the most, he did not lose his temper. But soon after, Michio's suggestion completely angered Tatsuo. Michio believed that such delicious tofu should not be limited to sales in Onomichi, and he wanted to help Tatsuo gain fame. Given Tatsuo's firm refusal to sell outside, Michio reached an agreement with a local school to invite a group of foreign graduate students to intern at the tofu shop. Upon hearing this, Tatsuo was furious. He could tolerate everything, but he was most stubborn about the tofu. Tatsuo believed that the students would have a game-like mentality and could not possibly make good tofu. He slammed the table, and Michio couldn't understand this almost obsessive insistence. Being repeatedly rejected despite his goodwill also made him unhappy, prompting him to raise his voice to argue. The meal ended on an unhappy note. From Haru's perspective, it was understandable for her father to refuse to expand sales, but why take it out on Michio? Through more than a year of dating, she knew Michio to be honest and sincere. He was unwilling to let his father's craft go unnoticed, so he worked hard to build a bridge with the school, hoping to promote this traditional skill. Why does his father always make things difficult for him? Haru was both angry at his father's stubbornness and resentful of his prejudice against Michio, So he simply said goodbye and turned to leave in the opposite direction of home. From that day on, Haru did not return home for a while. Once Tatsuo got angry, he was equally stubborn. The father and daughter fell into a Cold War that lasted more than half a month. Until Fumi visited, and after learning the reason, she couldn't help but smile. Indeed, the father and daughter have the same stubborn temper. However, no matter how much Tatsuo disapproved of Michio, it was Haru herself who would spend her life with him in the future. Without Tatsuo's blessing, she must have felt quite bad during this time. Children and grandchildren have their own blessings. Tatsuo should relax and accept Michio. Fumi also frankly admitted that she actually envied Tatsuo. At least he had a daughter to bicker with, unlike herself, who had been alone for many years. It turned out that both Fumi and Tatsuo were survivors of the atomic bomb explosion back in the day. Tatsuo was relatively lucky, living healthily to this day. Fumi's fate was much more difficult. Her parents passed away early, and she suffered from an incurable radiation sickness, which prevented her from starting a family. Now she had also been diagnosed with breast cancer and would soon undergo major surgery, with an uncertain outcome. Fumi's experience made Tatsuo's heart tighten. Since they met, Fumi had always appeared gentle and resilient in front of him, but the vulnerability she showed at this moment made him both heartbroken and anxious. He encouraged Fumi not to give up hope and to be strong enough to live on, to welcome more happiness. Even if she were to be bedridden in the future, at least she could smile, while reminiscing about the beauty of this life. Tatsuo had never thought that Fumi had silently endured so much suffering. Now she was seriously ill, yet there were no relatives by her side to take care of her. Tatsuo secretly resolved to find a way to help her. After sending Fumi home, he immediately consulted his neighbor Sanae, a meticulous woman, about how to properly care for a seriously ill lady. Sanae suggested that he might consider giving her a beautifully illustrated world cuisine photography book. After all, who wouldn't look forward to enjoying a sumptuous meal after recovering from a serious illness? This was also the first time Sanae learned that the usually quiet Tatsuo had developed a subtle friendship with a lady. Through her relay, several of Tatsuo's close friends became aware of Fumi's existence and situation, and they all expressed to him, if there was anything they could help with, just say the word. Tatsuo's friends were their friends. Tatsuo took the food photography book recommended by Sanae and went to the hospital to visit Fumie, who was about to undergo surgery. Without much discussion, Fumi's niece Minori and her husband suddenly came to visit, which greatly surprised Fumi. Her niece's family had long lived in the city and rarely visited, so it was a comfort to her that they could come at this time. Seeing this, Tatsuo politely stepped out of the hospital room to leave space for the two women. However, after only a few pleasantries, Minori quickly changed the subject and asked Fumi if, in the unfortunate event of a failed surgery, her properties should be arranged to be transferred to her. Fumi was instantly taken aback. Her niece was not there to show concern, but was actually coveting her assets, wanting her to sign transfer documents in advance. From then on, no matter how cleverly Minori tried to persuade her, Fumi remained deaf to her words. Though she had a gentle temperament, she was by no means foolish. How could she hand over her life savings to such a cold-hearted person? On the other side, Tatsuo unexpectedly ran into Michio in the hospital lobby. He was there to pick up his mother after her discharge. The way Michio patiently supported and carefully cared for his mother quietly changed Tatsuo's perception of him. Perhaps he had indeed judged him by appearances and misunderstood him. How could someone who was so filial to his mother have a bad character? Just as Tatsuo was pondering this, Minori and her husband stormed into the lobby in anger. It turned out that their family business was facing a cash flow crisis and urgently needed Fumi's property as collateral for a loan, but Fumi refused to cooperate. The two of them shamelessly discussed it, saying that since Fumi had no children, they were her only heirs and only hope for her surgery to fail and for her to pass away soon, so the property would naturally belong to them. This cold and ruthless talk shocked Tatsuo. He had never imagined that there were people in the world who would curse their own kin for personal gain. Furious, Tatsuo trembled all over and pushed Minori's husband to the ground. As a result, he was taken away by the police who had been alerted. Thus, after being separated for more than half a month, father and daughter finally reunited at the police station. Haru, accompanied by Michio, brought her father home. As soon as they entered, Haru couldn't help but scold her father for getting into a fight at his age. Had he ever considered what would happen if the other party retaliated and struck him in a vital area? Who would make the tofu in the shop then? How would she cope? Haru's tone was urgent. Tatsuo had always had a quick temper, but this time he did not get angry, because he sensed the deep concern hidden in his daughter's words. Tatsuo turned around and, under Haru's surprised gaze, solemnly apologized to Michio. "I'm sorry for my poor attitude towards you before. I held biases and repeatedly opposed your relationship. Now Tatsuo has come to understand that Michio is a reliable person, and Haru deserves all the good things in the world. From now on, Michio, please take good care of Haru, okay?" At this point, the prolonged estrangement between father and daughter quietly melted away with Tatsuo's concession. The next day when Fumi saw Tatsuo, she felt happy for their reconciliation. Tatsuo hesitated for a long time before revealing a long-buried past to Fumi. Actually, Haru is not Tatsuo's biological daughter. It turned out that Haru's biological father was Tatsuo's close friend, who passed away early due to a factory accident. In that difficult era, it was hard for a single mother and her child to survive. Seeing the two of them in such a lonely and helpless situation, Tatsuo took them in. From today's perspective, this act might seem puzzling, but at that time, it was common for people to support each other to survive. Tatsuo sincerely regarded Haru as his own. Unfortunately, Haru's fate was fraught with misfortune. Her biological mother passed away from a blood disease before reaching 40. This also led to Haru's former in-laws always harboring resentment towards her, fearing that she might carry hidden ailments due to her family's connection to the atomic bomb explosion affecting future generations. Ultimately, divorce became a reluctant choice. Haru's ex-husband's family settled in Tokyo. This was the deepest reason Tatsuo firmly refused to sell tofu to Tokyo. Tatsuo feared that his daughter, in helping him run the business, would have to step back into that painful place. He couldn't bear for his daughter to suffer any more harm. Now, seeing Haru regain happiness, a huge stone in Tatsuo's heart fell to the ground. But Fumi's illness made him worry deeply. Although every time they met, Fumi always comforted him with a smile, assuring him not to worry. It was still cancer surgery, and Tatsuo knew well the fear she bore alone. As he suspected, every time the night grew quiet, Fumi often hid away and cried secretly. She was so afraid of the surgery failing. Having never experienced the warmth of being with a loved one, and not having seen all the beauty of the world, she longed so much to live. Although Tatsuo always denied having special feelings for Fumiya, the neighbors had already seen through his thoughts. At this moment, when Fumi was seriously ill and needed support the most, they encouraged Tatsuo to bravely express his feelings to Fumie and accompany her through this difficult time at the hospital. However, Tatsuo always worried about his dignity, feeling that it would seem childish for an elderly person to talk about love again. Yet the next morning, Fumi called. Today was the day she would enter the operating room. She didn't want to disturb Tatsuo, but she was truly anxious and just wanted to hear his voice. Just as Tatsuo was still hesitating about whether to go to the hospital, Haru was anxiously urging him, pushing her father out the door. The moment he stepped out of the shop, Tatsuo suddenly realized the so-called face, compared to a loved one, was nothing to worry about. Being brave to express love has never been a shameful thing. He rushed to the hospital and finally reached her side just before Fumi was pushed into the operating room. When Tatsuo's figure appeared, Fumi's anxious heart instantly calmed down. Tatsuo tightly held her hand and said in a deep voice, "Don't go anywhere, just wait for her here." Wait for Fumi to come out safely, and Tatsuo would personally tell her that sentence. 1 year later. The taste of tofu remained the same, but Tatsuo was no longer the stubborn old man he once was. He specially bought a smartphone and humbly asked Fumi how to use it. He still treasured the piano performance flyer that Fumi had given him. At that time, due to her sudden illness, the agreed piece could not be played. After Fumi recovered, Tatsuo took out this well-preserved flyer and encouraged her to continue writing that unfinished chapter. Fumi sat down at the piano on the street, and the music flowed. At the end of the piece, passers-by stopped and applauded, and her gaze remained gently fixed on Tatsuo. Now life was steadily moving in a beautiful direction. Tatsuo felt it was time to hand over the most core step of tofu making to his daughter. Aging is unavoidable, and while he still had the strength, he should give the stage to the new force of life. So that morning, Tatsuo entrusted the process of making the coagulant to Haru. After tasting the tofu made by his daughter, he gave a sincere evaluation. "Very good. This is a good piece of tofu." This acknowledgement was something Haru had waited for too long. Amidst her emotions, a wave of sadness surged in her heart. She understood that her father was making arrangements for a future departure. However, among the countless types of tofu in the world, which one could compare to the one made by her father? The melt-in-your-mouth smoothness, the subtle bitterness intertwined with the bean fragrance, was a unique quality that only her father's hands and heart could impart. What Tatsuya wanted to say was far more than this. He sincerely thanked fate for making her his daughter. She and Michio must cherish this happiness and live well. It was still an ordinary morning, but in the steam rising from the stove, there was an added expectation of the old and new alternating. In the pure and delicate tofu, the craftsmanship tempered by time was condensed. As the morning light spilled over the windowsill, it reflected not only the smoke of the world, but also a father's deep, ocean-like love for his daughter.